Right, we're recording now, and we're gonna go on to module 2 for part 3, an NBCC part 3 presentation. Again, this material is copyrighted, and please make sure to obtain the permission of both Jensen Hughes and RIIC for any copy, if you wanted to have any copies or you want to distribute it. Disclaimer: these sites are only cue points. They're not basically a comprehensive statement of the literal requirements and application of the codes and the standards in their full interpretations. So you need to use the information today in conjunction with the codes and the standards together, and when in designing buildings and looking at specific projects. So we finished module 1. We're going to go into module 2. We're going to look at horizontal compartmentation. We're going to look at fire resistance, how we determine fire resistance. We're going to look at high buildings, special area protection, hazardous areas, mezzanines, interconnected floor spaces. Like usual, you have the chat room. If I don't, you can raise hands, and if I don't see your hand, interrupt me, ask me the question. Sometimes I keep focusing on one screen, I forget to look at the other screen. So, and I think you guys figured that out by asking me questions. So please do not hesitate to asking me questions during this period, and we'll try to cover it in time. And if we don't cover it, we will catch up. No worries with that, okay? So we went into the construction type. We determined the construction type of the building. We know the major occupancies. We know the subsidiary occupancies in the buildings. They are not major occupancies, but they do coexist with the major occupancy. We looked at vertical compartmentizations for floor assembly ratings, shaft ratings. We looked at spatial separation requirements. There's specific requirements for the cladding, exterior walls, and area unprotected openings that are allowed. So now we're going to take a look at the horizontal compartmentalization, which is a subdivision of within a floor area into different fire compartments that may come from tenant separations, that may come from public corridors, that may come from you know, we talked, it may be within the same occupancy. You might have some requirements for separation within an occupancy. We know that there is separation of major occupancies. We know that. So, and we know there is also provisions for separating some service areas, hazardous areas, and sensitive areas. We're going to look at high buildings. We're going to look at interconnected floor spaces, mezzanines, definitions, interconnected floor spaces, and spaces between multi-floor single tenant spaces. Again, our approach, the way we approach this, we take a look at the building code, and we go first to the tables of contents. We look at the safety within floor areas after we have determined all the requirements of the construction classifications of the building. So we know that there is 331, we have all floor areas. So there's generic provisions for all floor areas. So what are those requirements? There's specific provisions for assembly occupancies, for care and treatment occupancies, for residential occupancies, for industrial occupancies. And there's also 336 that is design of hazardous areas. And there's also service facilities. There's specific provisions for service facilities, rooms. So all these would go into the provisions related to those requirements for compartmentalization. Defined terminology, we know where to find the defined terms, and this comes from the defined terms in Division A, 1412. In low hazard industrial occupancy, we know it relates to the fuel load, the combustible content within the fuel load. And we can, a certain floor area or part of a floor area can be designated an industrial occupancy if the fuel, depending on the use of that occupancy and also depending on the fuel load with it. It is not more than 50 kilogram per meter squared, so it can go up to 50 kilogram per meter squared of floor area. Then it is. So if it's more than 50 kilogram per meter squared or 1200 megajoules per meter squared, then it's not a high hazard occupancy. It's an it's not, and it is not a high hazard occupancy, then we can designate it. But the definition for F1, an industrial occupancy containing sufficient quantities of highly combustible materials and flammable or explosive materials, which because of their inherent characteristics constitute a special fire hazard. So we may have a minute quantity but of some material, but because it's a very big hazard and it may create an explosive atmosphere, like dust. We may have accumulation of dust within certain industrial manufacturing areas, and it can be it can create explosive conditions. So it might not be highly combustible, it might be highly combustible, but depending on their use and the conditions, the situation may be within that industrial occupancy would lead us to going into a Group F Division 1 occupancy. Another way to determine whether it's a Division F Group Group F Division 1 occupancy is what? How do we know it's a Group F Division 1? What's another way?
Through the list of usage.
Yeah, exactly. So in the appendix notes, that we have the an appendix notes on the definition of those different assemblies and occupancies, and each one of them has a list of different examples of building uses that fall under each category or occupancy classification. So thank you, Morgan, for that. So remember the definition storage garage. So the storage garage typically does not have repair or servicing. So that's pretty clear.
Sorry, can I ask a question about the previous slide?
Yeah.
So what exactly constitutes the combustible content? What exactly do you mean by that?
Oh, anything that is, okay, combustible content, look around you in your house. Are you in your house now?
Yeah, I know. But if you're building, if you're kind of designing the brand new building, so that means that you would have to know in advance what's going to be stored or produced in that building and in what quantities in order to do the calculations.
Yeah, that's for industrial building, exactly that. Actually, they have to prepare fire safety plans for other labor and environmental purposes. They need to have pre-plans, and those pre-plans, they need to declare those. There's other regulation that regulate industrial occupancies, fortunately, because the building code does not address it. However, the building code addressed the classification of these occupancies, and you need to get it from either the engineer responsible for the designing of the processes and the systems or the building owner, and tell them to provide you that information, because you as an architect, you don't have it. You just say, oh, it's a building. But
that makes sense. And that would be then more reliable information than referring to Appendix A and kind of getting the sub-classification from within that category.
I mean, but you know, if you even in appendix, you see factories in both categories, right? And
yeah, I know, but
so
you
doesn't
might
tell you anything.
Yeah, well, I would think that doing the calculations would provide you with more reliable information in which category you really actually fit.
Yeah, so you have to ask that question. Tell me about your process. Tell me about the materials that were stored and processed. That exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So we talked about horizontal compartmentations, corridors, specific areas, sensitive areas, special hazard areas. Special hazard areas are rooms and spaces that, due to an associated hazard, are required to be separated from the remainder of the building for the protection of occupants outside the rooms. So let's take a look at those special requirements. Example 3312. Rooms for storage of hazardous substances. Actually, 3312 it's a generic. It's under general here. Hazardous substances, equipments, and processes. You guys found it? So under all floor areas, remember, so safety within floor areas, section 3.3 for all floor areas. So 3312 is under all floor areas. except as provided in section 335 and 336. So 335 and 336 are related to industrial occupancies and design of hazardous areas. But in the general section, except as provided in 335 and 336, the storage, handling, and use of hazardous substances shall be in conformance with provincial, territorial regulations, or municipal bylaws. In the absence of the regulation bylaws written in the clause, the NFC, the National Fire Code. So you've got the fire code that you have to comply with, or the for the provincial regulations, and let's see, provincial and territorial regulations that apply in this case. So in most cases, you will see that the fire code is going to apply to it, but still the provincial regulations regarding to industrial and labor law, occupational health and safety laws are going to also apply no matter what. We're not, as architects, we don't, we have to, in this presentation, we're focusing on the National Building Code. However, you see in the absence of provincial and territorial laws that you default to the NFC. Okay. Janitor's room, 33121. Again, we're still in general area, janitor's rooms, except as permitted by sentences 2 and 3, a room or space within a floor area of the storage of janitorial supplies shall be separated from the remainder of the building by a fire separation having a fire resistance rating not less than 1 hour. So the janitor's room is required to be separated by 1 hour. What are the exceptions? Can I have a janitor room without any rating?
Maybe if you don't store any chemicals.
Take a look at 33121. Keep reading, because I started except as permitted, right? So when I said the 1 hour rating, I didn't look except as permitted in 2 and 3. So what do 2 and 3 sentences 2 and 3 allow me to do?
It's not less than 45 minutes.
If the building is sprinklered, you don't need to rate it.
So in sentence 3 tells me, if I read sentence 3, it tells me that if the fire separation required in sentence 1, it's not required to have a fire resistance rating if the floor area in which the room or space is located is sprinkled throughout. So this tells me if that floor, not the building, it tells me if the whole floor is sprinkled throughout, you still require a separation, but you don't require a fire rating around it. So when I talk to the whole floor, including the janitor's room, is also sprinkled. So if the whole floor is protected with sprinklers, then I don't need the 1 hour rating. However, I still require the fire separation. And this is one example of a fire separation with no rating. Another allowance tells me the fire resistance rating of the fire separation required by sentence 1 is permitted to be less than 1 hour, but not less than 45 minutes. If the fire resistance required by subsection 322 is permitted is permitted to be less than 1 hour. So if your building construction allows as determined in 3.22, so when we looked at the building construction classification and the type of construction and the floor ratings, if that floor ratings are required to be only having 1 hour fire resistance rating, in this case I can have a janitor's room when the building is not sprinklered to have 45 minutes rating, right? To be less than 1 hour. Okay. But not less than 45 minutes. Okay. So if it's 1 hour, see, I always have to double check myself because sometimes there's too many code provisions and you're not going to retain all of them. And it's always good to look at the code. So the janitor's room, if you have 1 hour floor rating, the janitor's room is going to be 1 hour. If it's less than 1 hour or it has no rating, it has to be 45 minutes. Now, this is in the case your building is not sprinklered. If the floor rating is 2 hours, then your janitor room is still 1 hour. You don't have to go to the 2 hours because that's what sentence 1 tells you. Sentence 3 tells you sprinkler. If the building is not sprinklered, sprinkler the whole floor area, and then you can omit the fire resistance rating for the walls and the floors around the enclosure around the janitor room. So this is another example of a code section. And anyway, you have more provisions. Go ahead, Morgan.
I have a question on that. If the janitor room is sharing a wall with a suite with a residential unit,
Yeah.
would that wall need to be rated between?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's of course. Now,
so
if
it's just between janitor rooms and like corridors.
Yeah, this is separation of we've got the provisions for residential units and also separation of suites. So if you're looking at the separation of suites 3311, you have some provisions related to the suite separations from other building areas and between other suites. And if you look at 333, you've got provisions related to separation of dwelling units. So
Okay, thank you.
You gotta look at the whole code as in general.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not gonna go through each one of them. Go read them. If you have any questions, send me email, ask me questions related to that. But this is specifically in terms, I want to go through the storage garages, however. This is very important because we've got parking garages every building, and this applies irrespective, whether you consider the storage garage as a major occupancy or a subsidiary occupancy to the building. We talked about that this morning. So let's go to 3354 to 3357. Any questions? So 3354 starts with repair and storage garages. This is the article. And to look at the fire separation requirements, it has a provision 3354 sentence 3, a mechanical storage garage not more than 4 stories in building height in which no persons other than the parking attendants are permitted above the street floor level need not have a fire separation between the exits and the remainder of the building. So this one is about exits. I would like to go for the repair garage separation, so 3355, and storage garage separation 3356. And I'm looking at 33551 right now, okay? A repair garage, and you see repair garage, it is in italic. So it is a defined term, right? And you can go to part A, 1412 to look at the definition of repair garage. Any question there? Raman, do you have a question?
No.
Okay, so a repair garage and any ancillary spaces serving it, including waiting room, reception room, tool and part storage areas, and supervisory office spaces, shall be separated from other occupancies by a fire separation having a fire resistance rating not less than 2 hours. So a repair garage, with all its ancillary uses, must be separated from other occupancies by 2 hours. Is that clear? So when you're a repair garage and any ancillary spaces servicing it, they also including the office spaces, the supervisory office space, the storage areas, the waiting rooms, these are all part of the storage repair garage. That repair garage, if it's adjacent to a sales office, it needs to be a sales area. The sales, they need to be separated by 2 hour fire separation. Storage garage separation. A storage garage is another defined term, and we know it does not have any repair in it. A storage garage shall be separated. I'm reading right now 33561, except as permitted in 33424 and 5. Oh, I've got exceptions here. A storage garage shall be separated from other occupancies by a fire separation with a fire resistance rating with not less than 1.5 hours. So every storage garage needs to have a 1.5 hour separation, 1.5 hours. So that is for the separation. And there's other provisions related to vestibules requirements for between the storage garage and different types of occupancies. That's in 3357. So important to note the separation between Group A, Division 1, and a storage garage, a Group B, and a storage garage. You need to have vestibules. For Division 3, depending on the number of occupants, it's more than 10, you got required vestibule. In a building more than 3 stories in building height, and for whether it's a Group A, Division 2, 3, 4, or Group C occupancy, if it's more than 3 stories, you require vestibule. So that's a plus the separation requirement. And also there's provisions for ventilation of the vestibule dimensions. That's in Article 33574. There's provisions for dispensing of fuel under 3358. Facilities for dispensing fuel having a flash point below 37.8 shall not be installed in any building, except that this requirement does not apply to a canopy which is open of not less than 75% of the perimeter. Otherwise, facilities for the dispensing of fuel having a flash point below 37.8 shall not be installed above any space intended for occupancies. And then we have 3359 for multiple tenant storage warehouses, except and as provided in sentence 39315. I'm reading the code for you, and this is just examples of provisions. Unless a building is sprinkled throughout, each individual tenancy in a multiple tenant self-storage warehouse classified as an industrial occupancy shall be separated from the remainder of the building by a fire separation having a fire resistance rating not less than 45 minutes. So this is examples of fire separations for you. And of course, we've got the design of hazardous areas 2336. Before I go to public corridor, any questions on hazardous areas and special areas requirements? We didn't go over so we went over industrial occupancy requirements, but there is provisions related to care and treatment under 333. There is provisions related to assembly under 332. There's provisions related to residential occupancies under 334. So under 334, we can go to 3342. And sentence 1, what does it say about suites of residential occupancy? What separation do I have to have?
1 hour?
Yes, that under sentence 1, 33421, it tells me that I need to separation between residential occupancies from each other, as well as from the rest of the building areas. They need to be separated by a 1 hour fire separation. So that, and then you've got exceptions depending on some of the, for the floor assemblies, and fire resistance rating is permitted to be waived for dwelling areas and it's their own storage garage. So you got to go through the whole article to make sure that you know what are the exceptions and the exemptions related to it. I've got compartments and fire separation in care and treatment occupancies. There's specific provisions for the patients and sleeping areas. There's specific provisions for operating rooms. These are all detailed in 333 for care and treatment occupancies. For now, I'm just going to go into public corridors. You can read those sections. If you have any questions on them, let me know and we can go over them through email. As I said, we're going to cover as much as we can today, and if we have time, we can go in more details in other sections. So public corridors in 3319. Can you please go to 3319? So I am in the general section of safety within floor areas, and the safety within floor areas dictates that when I get out of my space. When we're circulating in corridors, we need to have sufficient space to circulate in case of emergencies. We need to avoid having obstructions. We should not have any dead ends. What's a dead end? It's when you walk all the way down a corridor and find out that there's no exit door or no egress door at the end, and you have to trace back your steps, and that is a lot of time to take, and that's the building code protects you from having to delay your egress from the building and have certain certain provisions related to dead ends in buildings. So in 3319, we're looking at the corridors. It sets the requirement that the corridor needs to be of sufficient width. It's a minimum of 1100 millimeter. And then it provides it has to provide access to 2 different exits in separate directions. It can have a minimal obstruction of 100 millimeter on either side, and dead-end corridors are not permitted to exceed 6 meters unless located entirely within a suite. So the NFC in this case is, an NBC in this case is different than provincial code in Ontario. You gotta watch out for those dead ends, and maybe in Quebec too. The dead-end corridors are not permitted to exceed 6 meters unless located entirely within a suite. So there are some allowances in, and there is some provincial codes do not allow dead ends in assembly areas, and some have different limits on dead ends. So a corridor provides access to an exit from more than one suite. So you take a look at this. I've got this suite here and this space, the doors leading to the corridor, and the corridor provide access to this exit and to this exit, and this is the circulating corridor. You've got my suites, get doors to the suites. A corridor used by the public serves only one suite, one tenant. So public corridors, they are basically used for multiple suites. A corridor used by the public typically serves one suite, but that you have a corridor, you know, in, for example, in clinics, you will see those, or in hospitals, you will see those, where you've got the one suite, and then you've got all these corridors used by the public. And again, the corridor used by the public, you have access to different egress doors, and then you go into this corridor, and it provides you access to different exits. And typically for those corridors are used for travel distance purposes and for security. So here we create this buffer of a public corridor. A dead-end corridor permitted or not? Your client would like to lease out the unit. This is a challenge. Your client would like to lease out the unit identified in yellow. Is she permitted to do so? The dead-end corridor is 7 meters.
No.
No, because?
Because it's not within the suite.
Not permitted is because it's not the suite, right? Okay. So that it's 33197. So this is basically the code section related to that. Except for a dead-end corridor that is entirely within a suite or as permitted by sentences 333331 and 33446, a dead-end corridor is permitted provided it's not more than 6 meters long. So if you want to see the exemptions, you got to go for the specific occupancy and know it. In this case, in some provinces where there is a second and separate means of egress not opening into a dead-end corridor may be deemed acceptable. So in this case, if you go in and you have access to this, or you can have access to this area, this may be deemed So each provinces has different permissions related to dead-end corridors, but the NFC is pretty straightforward, the 6 unless you're within within the suite. Corridor separation requirements, the 3314. Public corridors are required to be constructed as fire separations having a minimum of 45-minute fire resistance ratings in general, and then there is exceptions, exemptions to that, and we can go through it. When the entire floor is sprinklered, public corridors do not require fire resistance rating. But it does not apply to group B and C. And let's go to 3314. I don't want to tell you about what the code says. I want to tell you to be able to read the code and understand the provision. So let's go to 3314. So what that tells us in 3314, so a public corridor shall always be separated for the remainder, this sentence 1. You always has to be a fire separation unless permitted by sentence 4. So sentence 4 exempts the corridor from being a fire separation in a sprinklered floor area, except as required by some other sentences, except you are in a room or a suite, provided the public corridor complies. So you've got all these branching of different exceptions that where no separation is required. What's most important for us now is to look at the fire resistance rating. Let's look at the exception for fire resistance ratings, and because the details for fire separations are more minute. We'll go into the fire resistance ratings in sentence 2. Except as permitted by sentence 3 and clause 4A and B, the fire separation between public corridor and the remainder of the story shall have a fire resistance rating not less than 45 minutes. So I know that my corridor is required to be fire separated unless exempted by 4, and it has to have a minimum of 45-minute fire rating. But that my exemption to that, if a story is sprinklered, so I'm reading sentence 3, if a story is sprinklered throughout, not halfway or a portion of it. So if the story, now I'm not talking a floor area anymore. Remember before we saw a provision for janitor room where the floor area is sprinklered throughout. In this case, we have the whole story is sprinklered throughout. The story is sprinklered throughout, and no fire resistance rating is required for a fire separation between a public corridor and the remainder of the story, provided the corridor does not serve a care, treatment, or detention occupancy or a residential occupancy. So if I have a corridor within a residential occupancy, within a care, treatment, or detention occupancy, my corridor requires always a fire resistance rating. Okay? In other cases, if the story is sprinklered throughout, then I can omit the fire resistance rating for that corridor. Is that clear?
I have a question about point number 4.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're seeking exemption, then you have to fulfill all these requirements that are listed under point 4. That would be A, B, and C. It wouldn't be
or. There's an or.
Oh, there is or. Oh, I'm looking at
there's
the
or.
word and there. Okay.
No. Look at the or.
After
Yeah, you see it?
at the end of the B. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are we okay on this? All right, I'm gonna move on. So when the area here is not sprinklered, I've got office spaces, looks it. So I've got a public corridor constructed 45-minute rated fire separation. Here I've got the floor is sprinklered and a public corridor can be constructed as 0-hour rated fire separation. Where an entire floor area is sprinklered and the travel distance from all points on the floor to an exit is less than 45 meters, the public corridor does not require to be a fire separation. So this is one of the exemption in for 3314. So I think that one is A. We have the travel distance is achieved to from all point on the floor to an exit. So if I go to anywhere from the floor to an exit, I am within 45 meters from an exit from any point. Not to all exit, but at least one exit. I am within 45 meters. The whole story is sprinklered. Then I don't require a fire separation. I don't require a fire resistance rating. Okay. The 45 meter is an allowance that comes from having sprinklers in the building. And we'll take a look at egress and travel distances in a separate module. No fire separation required between washrooms and public corridor if both the corridor and the washrooms are separated from the remainder of the story. So if you have the washrooms as a block, and that block with the corridor is separated from the rest of the story, then I don't need to separate the washroom from the corridor. That's pretty straightforward. Okay? These are the exemptions in 3314. We're going through each one of them. So now we're gonna go, we did the corridors. We're gonna do fire resistance rating, fire separation, and enclosures. Let's go back to some definitions. Again, make sure that you know your definitions. And we're gonna take a look at what this is one of the questions. Then who asked me this morning about this one? Is it you, Rahman? About the fire compartment, fire separations, and fire resistance rating. So remember, the fire compartment is an enclosed space in a building that is separated from all other parts of the building by enclosing construction, providing a fire separation having a required fire resistance rating. A fire separation is a construction assembly that acts as a barrier against the spread of fire. And it's got a note in 14121. So let's take a look at note for fire separation. What does it say? So in the definition in part 1, I have a note at the end of that part, and it's related to definitions. Okay, did you find it? What is the page where I see the note related to the definition of fire separation in part 1?
120.
Division A.
120.
120, good. All right. So who wants to read that? I'm starting to have my voices going a little bit. Who wants to read this? Construction of fire separation is pretty critical to building construction. A volunteer?
I can do it.
Please, go ahead.
It is generally understood that the term fire refers to all products of combustion, including heat and smoke. Although a fire separation is not always required to have a fire resistance rating, it should act as a barrier to the spread of smoke and fire until some type of response is initiated. If the fire resistance rating of a fire separation is permitted to be waived on the basis of the presence of an automatic sprinkler system, it is nonetheless the intent of the code that the fire separation be constructed so that it will remain in place and act as a barrier against the spread of smoke until the sprinklers have actuated.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have the intent of having a fire separation. And this is critical when we have the provisions for sprinklers to replace fire separation requirements. There is the critical element of smoke that needs to be addressed with the evaluation. You cannot just look at the fire transmission in terms of heat transmission, thermal transmission, flame through. You need to take a look also at the element of smoke and addressing that heads on. And if you see an evaluation that does not address it, then it is an issue for the NFC. Okay?
My apologies. Where do we find this A-L412?
It's not L, it's 1.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I see the typo in there. It will be fixed. The fire resistance rating. The definition of fire resistance rating, again, it's in 1412. The time in minutes or hours that the material or assembly of materials will withstand the passage of flame and the transmission of heat when exposed to fire under specified conditions of test and performance criteria, or as determined by extension or interpretation of information derived therefrom as prescribed in the code. And now we go to D12122 in Appendix D of Division B. So let's go to D1212 of Division B, Appendix D. So let's go to that appendix. Remember, when we went to Appendix D, we saw this morning something about what? We were looking at type of materials that would be considered
the non-combustible materials.
Yeah. So Appendix D has a wealth of information, technical information that we can use for meeting some of the performance requirements for materials. And if we go to it right now, and remember where is Appendix D? It's right before Division C. So it's at the end of Division B. Fire performance ratings, D. And we're going to take a look at D1212. Okay, the fire performance limitations, interpretations of test results. The fire performance ratings set out in this appendix are based on those that would have been obtained from standard methods that the tests described in the code. The test methods are essentially a means of comparing the performance of one building component or assembly with another in relation to performance to fire. So when we're conducting fire resistance testing, we're comparing. It's a basis for comparing the different assemblies. Somebody has his there's background noise. Okay, thank you. Can you turn off your mic, please? Since it's not practical to measure the fire resistance of construction in situ, they must be evaluated under some agreed test condition. A specified fire resistance rating is not necessarily the actual time of the assembly will endure in a situ in a building fire, but it is that which with the particular construction must meet under specific conditions, specified methods or tests. So here what this is explaining is that the fire resistance rating is determined based on a specific condition of a test, and it compares the performance of one assembly to another, and the code provides certain criteria based on, and this is the minimum performance. It's a 2-hour fire resistance. Does it say that this is a 2-hour fire resistance under different condition in real life? No, but it's if you test it to this test, this is the minimum requirement and performance we want out of it. Now in Appendix D, you're going to see different fire resistance rating. If you go to section D2 under page D8, you start looking at you start seeing different fire resistance rating assigned to masonry and concrete walls in D2.021. To actually go back to the, I don't see the table of contents for the Appendix D. If you go to D.2, you see the reinforced and pre-stressed concrete floors and floor shafts. D.23, you see the construction with wood and steel framed walls, floors, and roof. So you can find fire ratings for those types of constructions by using component additive methods. And different components are assigned each different fire ratings, and you can add them up. You can have membrane fire protection per D239. And you've got specific, this is useful for sealing membrane openings and in existing buildings when you're doing lots of renovations. You've got provisions in D310. 2310 and 2311. You've got solid wood walls, floors, and roofs. And you've got protected steel columns under D2.8, and then we've got reinforced concrete columns and concrete beams, as well as D2.11. We've got glue laminated timber beams and columns. And this, in the new building code, we're going to have a whole new section related to the mass timber provisions. But this is for D211, is we have it already in here. So this is for fire resistance. For you notice that we also have D3 for flame spread ratings and smoke developed classifications. We haven't covered the finish ratings, and but we looked at the S1.02 and S1.02.2 for finishes that are supposed to go in a horizontal or that are thermoplastic. But we've got assigned finished flame spread ratings for certain types of materials in the D3. So Appendix D is very useful appendix. A lot of useful technical information on fire performance of materials, on fire resistance ratings, on flame spread ratings, as well as on combustibility. So take time to go through it. It is I did my PCIN testing for complex buildings, and I tell you, there is a lot of, it seems like everybody tests on Appendix D mostly, but, I'm not an architect, so I wouldn't know what's in exact, but definitely in terms of estimating the fire resistance rating of assemblies when you're using the code, Appendix D seems to be is an excellent reference for that. So we talked about fire resistive separation and fire resistance. We know that we've got floor ratings, we've got structural ratings from Articles 3.2, and then we've got the horizontal compartmentation requirements. It comes from either the occupancy or occupancy separations. It could be from special hazardous areas and special occupancy requirements, sensitive occupancy requirements. So all that is in the fire separation. We went through the Appendix D. In sentence 31711, the rating of a material assembly and material of a structural member that's required to have a fire resistance rating shall be determined on the basis of tests conducted in conformance with CAN ULC S101. A material or assembly of materials or a structural member is permitted to be assigned a fire resistance rating on the basis of Appendix D. So we already went through that. We looked at the definition of fire separation, and 3.1.81 gives us general requirements. So not only we have the appendix notes, we have the general requirements on fire separations performance. Any wall, partition, or floor assembly required to be a fire separation shall be constructed as a continuous element and, as required in this part, have a fire resistance rating as specified, except as permitted in sentence 2. Openings in fire separation shall be protected with closures, shafts, or other means in conformance with the applicable articles. And there is a whole slew of articles for the different types of openings, for duct openings, conductors, conduits, through penetrations, and also if we have fire separation contiguous to each other, they need to each be a continuous element. So this is the general requirements for fire separations and fire resistance rating. Any questions on that? I don't see any hands, and nobody is. Okay, is the reference for fire separation correct as per question response? Where is that? Where are you looking at? I am. This floor plan has 3 suites. Not, let's see, I'm not looking at suites. I'm telling you, it could be suites or it could be areas within the buildings that are used for separate uses. So here, let's see here. I don't even, I'm not showing doors or anything. So this is not a proper drawing to show, and it's not per code. But this is just to illustrate the elements that may be considered fire separations. If this wall has a floor above it and it's designed as a load-bearing wall, then it would have it would have the rating required for load-bearing walls, not just fire separation rating requirements. Fire resistance ratings, structural elements. Fire separations are the floors. Fire separations could be also walls. So, but for columns and beams, we have fire resistance rating. This is what is being illustrated here. Okay. Okay, everybody is on track with me. I see on some of the, okay. Let's go down. So we're looking at high buildings, that's 326. Can you go please to 326? So the code in general has different factors to determine whether the building is a high building or not. So in 3261, this is all outlined. The height of the building is more than 36 meters from grade to the floor level of the top story. So this is applicable to A, D, E, and F major occupancies. I'm going to turn to 326 with you. Are you all on 326 now? Okay. So a building that is more than 36 meters in height from grade to the floor level of the top story, then it's considered a high building. And you need to apply the provision of 326 to it. If you have a high occupant load in floor areas in a building over 18 meters, so if you have, it's like a high density of people in the floors of a building that is 18 meters high, then you need to look at the group A, D, E, and F, and you have provisions applicable to it to assess the exit capacities. And we'll show it to you. So you need to take a look at the exit capacity on a discharge story of exit discharge to be able to accommodate all the people from the floors above. So, and there is a comparison, and there's an equation that you can use, and we'll show it to you. So for building B occupancy, which is top floor more than 18 meters above grade. So if you're a group B occupancy, right away, if you're more than 18 meters from grade to the floor level of the top floor, you're in you're a high building. If you're a B2 and B3 occupancy above the third, if you have a B2 or a B3 occupancy above the third story, regardless of building height, you're considered a high story. And if you are a residential building, we've got a residence with the floor level that is located more than 18 meters above grade, then you are a high building. So for when we're looking at the occupant load, you remember we said for some occupancies with high densities, the 18 meter plus may apply in terms of high occupant load. This is the formula. So what we do is we add all the occupant load for all floors above the first floor to find the total occupant load of the building. So ignore the number of occupants on the first floor, which is the floor of exit discharge, and add up all the number of occupants above. Determine the aggregate width of all your exits serving the floor areas. So what is the aggregate width in meters of all exits serving the floor area? Divide the total occupant load of the building by 1.8 times the aggregate width of the exits in meters. So, and if the resulting value is over 300, the building is high building. So this is a simple determination, and the building code spells it out for us pretty easy. So for A, D, E, and F, I'm looking at 32611A subclause Roman 2. If the building is 18-meter high and it's measured between grade and the floor level of the top story, and in which the cumulative total occupant load on or above any story above grade. So the story on grade, you ignore it, so you add up the occupant load on all stories above grade, other than the first story. So divided by 1.8 times the width in meters of all exit stairs at that story exceeds 300. So you need to do that for all floor level and look if the exit stairs at that story, if the factoring of all the aggregate widths and dividing the total occupant load by 1.8 times the total aggregate width, if it's that result is more than 300, then the building is high building. So you want to see it's how much of the exits are accommodating the people from above. Let's see here. I have a building height of 6 stories. Each have 2 exits at 1100 millimeter each. The third, fourth floor, you have 2 exits at 1200 millimeter each. I've got the second floor, it has 4 exits at 1200 millimeter each. So I do this evaluation for each story because I'm looking at the exit from every story, right? So on the top story, I've got 149. I've already calculated the occupant load, and this is one calculation. We're going to take a look at it in another module, in module 3. We're going to take a look at for each story and do the calculation. On the the top level, we only have 149, right? So 149 divided 1.8 by 2 times 2 exits. So I did 2 times 1100, 1.1, which is, you got to look at it in meters. And you look at the result. Let's take a look at this. So now I've got, for the 5th story, what I do is I add 149 plus 142 is 291. I take 291 and I divide 291 by 1.18, 2 times 1.1, because my exit widths, I've got 2 exits serving those stories. So 2 times 1.1 is 73. On the 4th level, I add the 291 to the 164, I get 455. I divide 455. Now my exit width on the 4th and the 3rd level is 1.2. So it's 2 times 1.2. Here I add 455 to 233. I have 688. I divide by 1.8 times 1.2 times 2, get 159. So on each case, 2nd level, I do the same thing, 688 plus 608, 1296, and 1296 divided by 4 times this, I've got 150. Since all of them are less than 300, then the building is not considered a high building. So even though it's 18-meter high, between 18 meter and 36 meter, you got to take a look at doing this calculation for your building, whether if it's an A, D, or E, or F major occupancy, to determine whether it's a high building or not. Is the calculation clear for you now?
I just have a question. Do we not add up the resultant numbers? You use it per floor. They don't.
It's per floor.
It's not cumulative there. Okay.
Yeah. You only do the cumulative here.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you actually end up on the cumulative is actually here on the second floor. This is where you get up everybody. But you have to do floor by floor just to double check.
This is somewhat related, but do you use cumulative occupant load in determining exit width? So when you're doing sort of a reverse calculation?
No, you don't do that. If you take a occupant load at each floor and you address it floor by floor.
Okay.
Now there is some cumulative when you have horizontal. You need to address when you have horizontal exits. You do some cumulative adding up of exit width capacities, but added floor areas to accommodate that number of people. But that's different from a typical floor area. You don't do cumulative exits. You take it floor by floor because you assume everybody is, once they go down, people from the bottom, from lower levels already have gone out. So everybody is discharging at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any question? Okay, we keep going. High building requirements. Okay, main requirements to protect the occupants and firefighter from exposure to floors, limiting smoke movements into stair shafts and between floors. And limiting smoke movement into stair shafts serving floors below the exit level and above the lowest exit level. And we take a look at limiting smoke movement via shaft into other floors. We look at protection of elevator shafts, service shafts, garbage chutes. We have provisions related to requirements for using pressurization, moving fans, moving air fans, for stairs, serving multiple stories. If they are connected to between the multiple stories in the basement levels, exit stair shafts serving levels above the lowest exit level are to have a vent to the outdoors at or near the bottom of the stair shaft. Stair shaft serving stories below the lowest exit level are to be separated from the stair shaft serving stories above the lowest exit level. So these are all different protection approaches that are cumulative that add to the protection of high buildings from smoke. And then stairs serving stories below the lowest exit levels are to be provided with equipment capable of introducing fresh air at or near the bottom of the shaft. So they need to be pressurized. So stairs above, and then you have to separate the stairs from stairs serving the lower levels from the stairs serving the upper levels. You need to have a fire separation between them. You gotta look at the stairs serving the upper levels. You need to vent them at the bottom of the stair shaft, and the stair shaft. So you need to separate them from the stair shafts below, and you need to provide pressurization for stair levels serving below exit levels. Connected buildings, if you have two high buildings and they're connected to each other, you have to make sure that there is no contaminated air. If you have a fire from one building going into another building, 3263 addresses this and takes care of it. Then it says, and it's very generic in terms of requirement, measures are to be taken to limit movement of contaminated air from one building to another during a fire. 32361 provide measures to prevent potential smoke movement from one structure to another. I mean, there is specification in the codes. There is appendix notes related to it. There is also alternative solutions that can be provided related to that. But it's something to make sure that you keep in mind. Emergency operation of elevator is required. Manual recall is required for all elevator service stories above the first story. You gotta have a firefighter elevator for use by firefighters. So if you have different elevators serving different stories, then you're gonna have more than one firefighter elevator. And then you have to have venting to aid firefighting on each floor. So you need to have windows or use the HVAC system to be controlled by the at the central fire alarm and control facility. And the central alarm and control facility in 3267 is a room where all the provisions for fire and life safety installations are controls related to those are provided, and it should be close to the principal entrance. If you do not put it at the close to the principal entrance, you have to have an alternate solution in conjunction with communication with an agreement with the fire department, because it's mainly for the use of the fire department. So it's not a discussion just with the building department. A voice communication system is required if the top story is more than 36 meters above grade, or where is a group B2 and a B3 above the third story. So a voice communication system is not always required for high buildings. And also it's required for B2 and B3 occupancy above if they are located above the third story. Testing for 3269. Let's take a look at 3269. All these systems need to be tested to make sure that they are working. And the systems and control of smoke movement and mechanical venting required by Articles 3262 and 3266 shall be tested to ensure satisfactory operation. And this is the report that goes to the building department as well as the fire department. Let's see. We have, so this is the provisions related to 326 for high buildings. In terms of testing, I want to, since we're talking about testing, I want to point to you the provisions related to systems. It's actually we'll cover it in the systems discussions tomorrow, but there is another provision in the code, 32.9, I think. Well, I'll double check it. It requires testing for all buildings. You have to do testing, integrated testing of all the fire alarm with the fire protection systems and the different controls between them and special fire life safety systems. So that's a new requirements in the building code. It's there is a special test coordination testing standard that is being published, and it is now required in the code that's be documented and conducted by the and it is the responsibility of building owners to do it. But anyways, for high building, this is a requirement, and we'll go over the other one for all buildings tomorrow. Mezzanines. Okay, let's go back to general in 321, and then we'll take a look at mezzanines in 328. So 321, if you want to take a look at it, please. Are you seeing that you're navigating the building code now easier, or is it the same? You're still having a hard time finding things? What, you guys are having a conversation on the side here. So what are you talking about? Okay. If you get to 300 on any one floor, the whole building is a high building correctly. But if you get it at 300 on one floor, then all the floor below it will be higher. So yeah, we don't want to mix with the other codes, but thank you for pointing that out. High building requires crossovers. Unlocked floors in the stairs, this is not required in the NBC. No, the crossover is required in general for all buildings, like for stairs in all buildings. It's take a look at it. It's a general provision for stairs. And we'll look at stairs with means of egress. Remind me to make that a point for you tomorrow, okay? To switch to the second exit stairs, so every fourth floor is unlocked stairs. So thank you, Nijar. You already addressed it. You guys are ahead. So you're talking about exits. 3.4 is about exits. So that's a section for tomorrow. We can cover it tomorrow and we'll see if it's clear or not. Okay, yeah. So we all come to the same conclusion, but for the benefit of the others, this area of discussion is not related to high buildings in the NBC. It's related to exit stairs, and we will take a look at it tomorrow. And that's a segue on the chat. It's always nice to see on the chat how much people are involved and engaged. It's really good. I hope I did not digress too much here. Anyways, so we're gonna go to the mezzanines. Fun stuff. Mezzanines, you know why? Because we do so many alternative solutions to mezzanines. We do presentations on mezzanines, and it seems whether you're an industrial art or industrial type of buildings architects, and you're looking at those, or you're also an architect working in libraries, with libraries, institutional buildings, you're gonna come across these all the time. So let's take a look at this closely. I think we've got a few minutes left, but I think we can do it. We can do it. 3, 2, 1, 1. Let's take a look at 3, 2, 1, 1. First of all, a rooftop enclosure. Take that note. Provided for elevator machinery, a stairway, or a service room used for no other purpose other than for the services for the building, they shall not be considered as a story in calculating building height. So remember that one. So people are familiar with it probably. A rooftop enclosure provided for elevator machinery, a stairway, a service room used for no purpose other than for service for the building, that shall not be considered as a story. So that's so when you're calculating building height and number of stories, do not count those service rooms. Okay. Now let's go to 32113.
I'm sorry, which point was the previous one? I missed that completely. Did you say 3.2?
3.2111.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to take a look at the mezzanines, and that's in 32113. So for mezzanines, except as required by sentence 5, the space above a mezzanine need not be considered a story in calculating the building height. Remember, if we have more stories, the stricter the construction requirement is. If we have less stories, we have more flexible construction. So that's why mezzanine determination, whether they're considered a story or not, is an important element for construction classification of the building. So if the mezzanine is not considered a story, if the aggregate area of mezzanine that are not superimposed on top of each other does not exceed 40% of the open area of the room in which they are located, and except as permitted in sentence 7 and 332.13.3, the space above the mezzanine is used as an open area without partitions or subdividing walls higher than 1.7 above the mezzanine floor. So the space above a mezzanine is not considered a story in calculating the building height, provided that one, and we're going to go with drawings, diagrams, and I'll show you that. If one, the aggregate area of the mezzanines that are not superimposed does not exceed 40% of the open area of the room in which they are located. And the open area is, the mezzanines are open area without partitions or any subdivided walls higher than 1.7 meter, 0.7 meter above the mezzanine floor. So that means I can have different rooms, mezzanines, and as long as the mezzanine is an open area and it's got a wall, it's guards actually for not higher than 1.07 meter, then I do not consider them as a story, as long as within each room they don't take up more than 40% of that room area. I've got another exception in 4. The space above a mezzanine is not considered a story in calculating the building height, provided the aggregate area of mezzanines that are not superimposed and do not meet the condition of sentence 3 does not exceed 10% of the floor area in which they are located, and the area of a mezzanine in the suite does not exceed 10% of the area of the suite. So if I have an aggregate area of mezzanines not more than 10% of the floor area, and the area of the mezzanine is no more than 10% of the area of the suite, I don't worry about the openness of the suite of the mezzanine. All I need to do is make sure that I limit I limit the area of my mezzanine to not more than 10% of the story and not more than 10% of the suite. And this way I can have subdivided mezzanines, and subdivisions within the mezzanines. So what is a mezzanine? It's an intermediate floor assembly between the floor and a ceiling of any room or story, and includes an interior, and that could include also interior balconies. What is an interconnected floor space? It's an superimposed floor areas or part of floor areas in which the floor assemblies that are required to be fire separations are penetrated by openings not provided with closures. So this is what I have openings like for stairs, or it's like the floors are open onto, and then I have the mezzanines, which is a floor assembly within a room. So examples of mezzanines. An intermediate floor assemblies between the floor and ceiling of any room or story can include an interior balcony. They're not considered as stories when calculating building height if they meet specific conditions. Now, there is something related to platform. You see some platform for storage. In 3211, let's see. In 32116, is it? Yeah. Platforms intended solely for periodic inspection and elevated maintenance catwalks need not be considered as floor assemblies or mezzanines for the purposes of calculating building height, provided they are not used for storage and they are not constructed with combustible materials unless the building is permitted to be of combustible construction. So depending on the construction of building, the construction of the platform needs to be of similar construction materials as required for the type of construction. As well, they should not have any storage on them. And therefore, the platforms that may solely be used for periodic inspection and for maintenance catwalks, you don't need to consider them for the purposes of as part of the floor assemblies or mezzanines for calculating building height. I've got other provisions for a service phase, which in sentence 8 that addresses interstitial service spaces, and there's specific provision for them. But let's focus on mezzanines. So this is an open mezzanine. The mezzanine is not considered a story if it occupies not more than 40% of the open area of the room in which it's located. And the space above is open, and space below can, of course, be enclosed. If there is enclosure around the mezzanine, and this is non-rated, basically open area, this is permitted as long as it's not more than 10% of the floor area of the suite in which it's located. Space above can be fully enclosed, and as long as it's not more than 10% of the story or the suite it is in. So no requirement for visual communication here. The 10% is determined on area of suite or floor area of story, regardless whether the space below is open or closed. So we need to look at both of them. And the 40% open mezzanine complies, and it is maximum enclosed area with 40% open mezzanine must be less than 10% of open area of the room. Walls must not block the view. So this one, when we have open mezzanines that are permitted, we have permission for having 10% of the area of the mezzanine as long as that area does not block the view of the rest of the mezzanine. Catwalks, this is the provision for catwalks. And the egress for mezzanines, and then the mezzanines have egress provisions specific to them in 34.221. Must be designed as enclosed exits from floor areas. There's a couple of exceptions related to egress from mezzanines. Small mezzanines may be served by open egress stairs. That depends on their area and the travel distance to the point of egress. This is all in 34.22. Okay. Egress from mezzanines. If the mezzanine has a single stair, meets 3282, occupant load less than 60, meets table 3422 for maximum area and travel distance. So in this case, we've got different conditions. This is different illustrations for mezzanines. Take a look at them, and I've got a less than 60 occupants on the mezzanines. It meets the provisions of 32821, meets tables 3422 for maximum area and travel distance. I've got exceptions for mezzanines. They can have open egress stairs and or enclosed exits if they serve group A1 occupancy, A3 indoor occupancy with less than 2 stories, or ACDF if they are less than 500 square meters, 40% of open area below, or 10% enclosed and 10% of floor area of suites. So these are provisions of having an open egress stairs that would be allowed for mezzanines. Mezzanines are required to have 2 enclosed exit stairs if they are more than 500 square meter in area. So 3422 is essential for egress from mezzanines. Let's take a look at the interconnected floor spaces. We are 508. I think we just have, I think I want to leave the interconnected floor spaces for tomorrow because that's the only thing that's left for today. And I leave it for tomorrow because it's already 509. And I want to make sure that I go through it in a more paced way than the mezzanines. So make sure to go through the LMS to do the quizzes for both modules. I think you should be able to do it. We'll finish the interconnected floor spaces tomorrow. We'll go over the quizzes. And if there is any questions, please do not hesitate to send me emails. You have my email, so send me emails with questions. And I'll recap the answers during the meeting tomorrow, and hopefully we'll catch up. We'll try to catch up as much as we can. But we have to cover all the material, and we will cover it. So don't worry about that. Is that okay? Jennifer, your hand is up.
Amal?
Yes.
Excuse me. Could you share with us some tips to go faster before the exam? To go faster through the NBC, some tips or some...
Put your table of contents, tab them. Tab the table of contents of each part. The appendix, tab it. If you get stuck on something, if there is for building types of construction 3.22, the tables, the occupancy, the critical tables that we outlined, make sure that you tab the pages for that. If you are having a hard time finding something, there's always the index of that's the slowest way of doing it. But if you get stuck, there is a way of finding the requirements for all the code sections related to a specific topic are in the index. So take a look at that. Don't forget that you have the notes. So or the notes requirements related to the to each part, and tab it to make sure that you can go directly to the appendix and double check the provision clarifications. But and I think with the tabbing you can go directly to those areas, and the table of contents always tap them because through them you can go directly to some of these answers too. Okay, so we started recording, and good morning again, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the continuation of Module 2 of the NBCC Part 3. Some of the students have asked me questions on email, and I want to point out to one important article. One of the questions that Nicole raised. It's Article 3228, and this is related to the classification of building construction, and it relates to the 10% rule. The 10% rule applies when we have mixed occupancies, mixed major occupancies. We're talking here about building classification in accordance to 322. So we have mixed major occupancies. We said we take the most conservative one and we apply it to the whole building unless we have superimposed occupancies. But if we have mixed occupancies and some of them are no more than 10% of the floor area, Article 3228 allows us to basically ignore them only for the purposes of the classification of the building. So you classify the building based on the major occupancy of the building that constitutes 89% or less. Or 89% of the building. So if you have the ones that constitute the 10%, we can ignore them only if they are not group F1 and F2 buildings. If they are any other occupancies like A2, A, C, D, E, F3, you can ignore them for the purposes of the 322 classification of the building and the construction type of the building. So this is relating to the 10% rule in Article 3228 that people should be aware of it. And thank you for your question, Nicole, on that. Okay, so in order to catch up, we're going to be going to the interconnected floor spaces. Any question on the 10% rule? Or is it clear for you? Okay. Somebody has his microphone on, please. Can you? Okay. So we're going to talk about interconnected floor spaces today. And I will remove just the chat so I can see your chats clearly. Okay. So if you want to look at the interconnected floor spaces, it's a defined term, and we looked at the definitions of this term yesterday. Please go in your code book to that article 3282. Quickly, you know how to go through and navigate the code 3282. It's on page 3103. So interconnected floor spaces, they're basically openings between different floors. They could be mezzanines, they could be platforms, it could be just an open space areas. If you have a feature stair within connecting two stories, so another that would be considered an opening. Typically, that you know also that your floors, when we classify the construction of the building, your floors have to be fire separations and are provided with fire ratings. In 322 classification of building construction, also sometimes you will see there's requirements for fire resistance rating and type of construction of the mezzanines and the construction of its floor. There will be specification for how to build the mezzanine in 322. So look out for that. Look at some of these examples of building construction where there's specification for the mezzanine rate, fire resistance rating, or fire separation requirements. And remember, sometimes we have fire separations with no fire resistance rating, and sometimes we have construction with just a fire resistance rating with no fire separation requirement. So I want to take you step by step into 32881. So normally there's exemptions and application. So we go through application before we go through 3282, 3286. So into 3281, we're going to read it quickly, except as permitted in 3282 and sentences 33423, the portion of a floor area or mezzanine that do not terminate an exterior wall or a firewall or a vertical shaft. So if we have those sections of the floor or mezzanines that do not terminate to an exterior wall, firewall, or a vertical shaft, they must terminate at a vertical fire separation, having a fire resistance rating not less than that required for the floor assembly, and that fire separation needs to extend from the floor assembly to the underside of the floor or roof above. And it has to be, or otherwise, if you don't provide, it's an or, if you don't provide that vertical fire separation, there is special protection requirements for floor openings. So you can always have them, but you need to have either a vertical fire separation or you need to protect that opening in accordance with the requirements of 3283 to 3288. So all the provisions of Article 3283, 3288 will apply if you do not provide a fire separation. Now there's exceptions for this. One thing of note before we go to the exceptions is that in Article 3281, sentence 3, a floor area containing sleeping rooms in a building of group B2, treatment care, hospital types of building, long-term cares, a floor area containing sleeping rooms in a building of Group B, Division 2 major occupancy shall not be constructed as part of an interconnected floor space. So in this case, we're saying we do not apply interconnected floor spaces. We don't allow them in Group B2 major occupancy where we have sleeping rooms. So whether you protect them or not, they are not allowed. So you need to have the vertical separation.
Hi, Amal.
Hi.
Apology for interrupting. Would you kindly put the presentation in the presentation view, please?
Oh, okay. I thought it was in there. You don't see it?
You were sharing your screen, sorry, but if you could put the presentation in the
yeah. Sorry about that.
Presentation view, please.
Yeah. Okay.
For full screen, yes.
I'll do that. Thanks, Camille.
Great, thank you so much.
So we talked about 3281, and then we go to the exceptions in 3282. So in 3282, we go to the next slide here. So I'd rather put all the information for you because you're going to be reading in the code book anyways. In 3282, we have exception to spatial protection in sentence 6. In sentence 6, we have an interconnected floor space need not conform to the requirements of Articles 3283 to 3288. So if I'm permitted to have an interconnected floor space, I don't need to protect it, and I don't need to have a vertical fire separation, provided if it consists of the first story and the second story, and the first story and the story next above it, that's the second story, or below it, or the story below it, like first basement level, but not both. So you can connect the first story with the story above it, or the story below it, but not both. And this is applicable only for the first story and at the connection of the floors above or below. It is sprinklered throughout, or where the building area. So the interconnected, this is talking about interconnected floor space sprinkled throughout. Remember, it doesn't say the building. It's talking about the interconnected floor space area. So it is sprinkled throughout or where the building area is not more than 1/2 of the area permitted by section 322, the openings through the floor are used only for stairways, escalators, and moving walks. And there is a note in the appendix related to that. So what this is telling us, if the building is sprinkled throughout, then I can have this connection between either the first and the second, or the first and the level below it. If I don't have sprinklers, or if that area is not sprinkled throughout, then I have to double check the building area. And if it's not more than 1/2 that permitted in the 322, then I can use the openings only for stairs and moving walks or escalator, but I will not be able to have the open mezzanines in them, or interconnect other types of interconnected floor spaces. And this is only allowed for certain types of groups. Group A, division 1, 2, 3, D, E, group E, F, 2 or 3 major occupancies. So this provision in 32826 is very critical to learn the differences between this one and for those that are used to using other building codes. The NBCC has pretty much a different requirement. It's than OBC. We have different provisions. Some of the other regulatory bodies in the provinces have added some modification to it, but the NBCC Article 32826 is still the same and has not changed. So take a look at it. Now, so that's for 32826. Stairs, now we have some provision specific to stairs between floors. If we have stairs between floors, there is really no exception specific to them. However, there is one for escalators and moving walkways. Now, in other types of, in other provincial codes, they have added stairs to the list. So if you read 32825, take a look at 32825. Do you see stairs in there? Or is it just limited to walkways and escalators?
No stairs.
No stairs, thank you. Okay. Another one that we have another exception for in 32822, we have openings through a horizontal fire separation for vertical ramps in a storage garage are not required to be protected with closures and need not conform to this subsection. This is a natural one when you have a storage garage. For all the openings between the different floor areas, you need those for vehicle circulation. So these are allowed and it's not required to be protected. And 32822 Article 2 allows it. In 32823, if a closure in an opening in a fire separation would disrupt the nature of manufacturing process. So now you're in a plant, you have a manufacturing process. You need to have those openings, and for the process itself, the closure for the opening is permitted to be omitted, provided precautions are taken to offset the resulting hazard. So if you have a process and you have multiple openings as part of the manufacturing process, you don't need to provide closures. Typically, we provide closures for openings for fire separation, whether they are horizontal or vertical. In this case, you don't need that. You need the closures as long as they are essential for the manufacturing process. And then we have another one, 32824, an interconnected floor space in a Group B Division 1. This is for detention. Occupancy need not conform to the requirements of 32823 and 32828, provided the interconnected floor space does not interconnect to more than 2 adjacent stories. So if you have 2 stories in a detention area, and this is Article 32824, you can allow the interconnection of 2 stories, but but not more than 2. This is for group B1 occupancies. Otherwise, if you don't meet any of these exceptions, you have to go to 3283 to 3288 and look at all the provisions for protecting the interconnected floor space. The building must be sprinkled throughout. The vestibules are required at each level of exits, openings, exit openings directly into interconnected floor space. Vestibules are required. So this one, you will see that now we have vestibules required either at the elevator door openings in the interconnected floor space or the elevator openings in the stories above. And a protected floor space can be used to accommodate peak traffic during duration evacuation, otherwise must be designed for cumulative exiting. These are provisions for each one of them. So take a look at them. 3283. So 3283 is pretty clear. The building must be sprinkled throughout. Now 3284, vestibules are required at each level for exits opening directly into interconnected floor space. So you have to provide for vestibules. And there's specification for the vestibules. If you're looking at 3284, you'll see that the vestibules have doorways not less than 1.8 meters apart. They are separated by fire separation from the floor area that is, but they are not required to have a fire resistance rating, and they are designed to limit the passage of smoke. So you need to have so you need to have pressurized, basically, vestibules. An opening into the interconnected floor space, an exit opening need to conform to 34326. This is related to exit separation in 34326. And if an elevator hallway opens into this one is for elevators, hallways, this is sentence 3 in 32843. If an elevator hallway opens into interconnected floor space and into the floor stories above, so you might have an elevator serving only the interconnected floor space. You don't need to worry about that. But if that elevator goes to the story above the interconnected floor space, either the doors of the elevator in the interconnected floor space need to have vestibules or the other approach is to provide the vestibules in the stories above. And this is for evacuation. We need to take a look at 3285 and 3432. 3285 says a protected floor space used to satisfy the requirement 34326B shall be separated from the interconnected floor space by a fire separation having fire resistance rating not less than that required of the floor assembly in which it's located, have all openings in the vertical fire separation between the protected floor space and adjacent interconnected floor space protected by vestibules, and shall be designed so that it's not necessary to enter the interconnected floor space to reach the exit. And then you double check on 34326B. So we need to take a look and 34326B, go to that clause. (34326B). The required exit for exit stairs that serve interconnected floor space shall be designed in accordance with Article 328.33888 shall be cumulative. So for the stairs that serve the interconnected floor space, you basically add the number of people for on all interconnected floor spaces to accommodate the exits and evaluate the exit capacity. Unless the stairs provide not less than 0.3 meters square of area of treads and landing for each occupant in the interconnected floor space. So unless you design the space to based on this factor of 0.3 meters squared, or you protected floor spaces conform to Article 3.5 285 are provided at each floor level, and then the protective floor space on the floor level has not less than 0.5 meters squared of space for each occupant that floor of the interconnected floor space. So either you provide the vestibules or you do cumulative, basically, calculation of the occupant load, or you design the stair to accommodate at 0.3 per meter squared. These section, I'm going a little bit quickly through those, but you gotta basically take a look at all the references in 3283. If you are going to protect the interconnected floor space, there are specific requirements, and you gotta take a look at them carefully, and they're going to be affecting also egress from that. A draft stop is required to surround every interconnected floor space opening at every floor. This is 3286. It's a simple requirement. A draft stop, and this is, you see a draft stop for the floor opening. Can you see it? Okay. A mechanical exhaust system. Now in 3287, you require a mechanical exhaust system must be provided to provide smoke from interconnected floor space at the rate of 4 HH per hour. That's 32871. And the interconnected floor space must be designed so the combustible content, this is 3288. And again, this is limitation on interconnected floor spaces that are not that are not exempted and need to be protected. So 3288. One is talks about combustible content limits, and this one is in the museums. You get a lot in it. In some of the areas where we're looking at a lot of fuel contents, you got to address it, especially in where you do expositions with multiple floors opened onto them. The interconnected floor space must be designed so that combustible content, excluding interior finishes in those parts of the floor area in which the ceiling is more than 8 meters above the floor, are limited to not more than 16 grams of combustible material for each cubic meter of the interconnected floor space. So there is limitation on combustible content, especially when you have high ceiling. You don't want to pile up the whole space with combustible fuel, and then none of the systems that you have in place will work for you because with the sheer amount of fuel loading in it. So we covered those area. Any question on that? No, the interconnected floor space, you start from the level of the lowest level of the interconnected floor space to the ceiling. That's what it, to the ceiling of this above. That, it's Dan?
I have a question about mezzanine, if I can go back to that. So what happens when we have superimposed a level above your first level of mezzanine? Would that be considered separate level of the building?
I mean, the mezzanine considerations, it's the protection of those if it's going to be protected. However, there are exemptions, especially when you have the areas for viewing, arts, theaters, and all that. You will have certain areas that are opened, and then but typically the superimposed ones will, in other types of occupancies, will need to be protected. Some areas, if you are exempted and from being a story, if you look at the 3281, it may be a platform, considered a platform, and may be considered a mezzanine. If you look at 3281, that except as permitted in our in sentence 33423, so you go back in 3282, the portion, where is the portion of the mezzanine? The one that looks at mezzanines, whether it is a story or not. Let me double check on that one for you. So you have superimposed mezzanines, and you are outside the assembly area, and most of your mezzanines are permitted to be located in the building, and whether they are considered to be a story or not is, we looked at it at the beginning of the 3.2. Let me see here. Okay, in 3211, we looked at the type of mezzanines, and we looked at the aggregate area of mezzanines that are not superimposed. Okay, and this is only for consideration. You're looking at them only for consideration of whether they are considered a story or part of the floor area. So if they are not part of the floor, if they are not a story, then they're not considered the floors assemblies. They will not be protected similar to other floor areas for stories. So that you got to take a look at that first. So let's go back to 322 to look at an example of mezzanine specification. So typically mezzanines are required to have a fire resistance rating. Sometimes if you go in 322, for example, in 32284, it tells me that a mezzanine, 32284 tells me a mezzanine shall have, if of combustible construction, a fire resistance rating not less than 45 minutes. It's not a fire separation in this case.
Just a fire resistance.
It's just a fire resistance. So
yeah, but that's for your mezzanine, which is your first level. But if you have another level that's kind of superimposed onto that first level of mezzanine, does it have to be?
It's considered a story, in which
Yeah.
case it's considered a fire separation. And if in this case, yeah, but then you want to rule out that it's not used as a platform with no storage, or if it's used as a mezzanine, if it's not more than 10% of the floor area. So if it's depending on the area, you can still look at it as a mezzanine that's no more than 10%.
But let's say, like, I'm sorry, maybe I'm digressing here with this question, but I have a mezzanine that is enclosed with fire ratings of 45, and then it completely enclosed. But then above that, there is another level, and they're interconnected with the stairs in between, and it's A2 occupancy. So just
A2,
wondering.
A2 occupancy. Yeah, the second one would be required, would be considered a story, which would require to be a fire separation, as well as you will need to consider protecting it. So you're already on, you're not on the first level, you're on second level. It's a fire separation would be required in your case. So like when we're asking me questions for a specific project, you gotta know all the elements related to it. So trying to provide a specific answer to a generic question on a project is not something that we recommend. So if you have project questions, send them to me separately. I will try to answer them. And if you want to put them on the chat, I will answer them. But give me some more details, because I'm going to give you different answers or multiple answers for your questions until you give me the specific or your situation.
Yeah, I understand. I apologize. Should have explained
that's
at
no
the
problem.
beginning. Yeah,
no problem.
Thank
No
you.
problem. But it's just for everybody's, comfort level with the presentation, as well as for me to be able to give you the right information. It's best that we have the details. Okay, so now we're gonna log out and come back to module 3. Okay, we'll see you there.